Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
Scrumdiddlyumptious.
Are you high? Anyway, no, I don't actually believe
I
that.
was wondering what your response to that would be, and did not disappoint.
Anyway, oh no, there we go. So today I've got a bunch of sort of questions I've been thinking about. Uh, I have been incredibly energized this year. I've lost 15 pounds, and I'm going to lose a lot more uh, so far this year.
Huzzah.
It's 50. These are 15 pounds I've kept off. We'll say. Uh, Going into the year, we've got a Trump presidency. We've got a whole passel of things that are, quite frankly, very interesting and very worth talking about. But the thing I'm sort of going over in my head is the idea of action in the Christian context. Does that make sense?
No.
Good, good. Uh, so I can explain myself. If you had said yes, I would have just stopped talking about it and we would have ended the stream. Uh,
Oh, thank God.
so, the idea of action is that I know that God expects us to do things with the gifts that we're given, with the time that we're given. However, what I run into is, for myself in a personal sort of way, but also like in the general sort of way, that there's guilt for acting, at least in our generation, and it's hard for me to sort of put one part in one area and another part in one area. Like what's a godly guilt, and what's not a godly guilt. Does that make sense? Like how much of it
Yeah.
is me guilty for being a white man? Not that I experienced that, but that's the big one people bring up and make TikToks about and stuff like that. And what's me experiencing, guilt for my real and present sin. Like there's a thing about peace and whatnot. Like I named this stream "Is God a God of War?" Obviously, the answer is no. At least not in the way that uh, at least not in the way that people think of with as a god of war, right? He's not Shiva, he's not Ares, he's not Athena, he's not any number of the horrible Aztec war gods. He is clearly, a god of justice. The how do I want to put it? His holiness and his love demand things, while at the same time uh, we are expected to live on this world and act as good stewards of what he has provided, and sometimes that includes war, which he blesses us in the portrayal in the prosecution of. Does that make sense? Maybe.
Maybe you're gonna need to expand on this.
Okay. So I've been reading the work of a internet schizophrenic philosopher. Not really schizophrenic. He's fairly sane, but the guy called Barbaric Disciple, and his idea is that America has lost its connection to God in a fundamental level. Now I don't accept that on its face. I have experienced God working in my life, so have you, so have other people, but he's talking in sort of a racial term. And speaking to you, whose family, came in on Ellis Island,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit different. You experience it differently. Even though I do believe you are an American, jokes aside, most Italians outside of the Jersey Shore have pretty much assimilated. Those on the Jersey Shore, I don't know. I view them like pug dogs. Keep Pookie in
Uh,
a handbag.
so,
But
do you want me to give a serious answer to that?
let's give it. Let's hear
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this, and
it.
I'm like, no, this is very like, because it's a serious issue.
Yes.
Back in the olden days, they were arguing, when Vox would say things like this, you can't like that magic dirt theory was fault. Chesterton is famous for being one of the people actually, and it's worth noting because we're going to discuss him. And it's one of the things I don't agree with Chesterton about. He said that America was a church, right? That was its fundamental difference from other nations, right? That other nations, you need to be born
Mm-hmm.
into it, like a how I don't remember what the metaphor he used was, but my metaphor is like, a family, right? A
Right.
house. But that America was like a church, that you could be baptized into it, so anybody could be an American. I don't agree with Chesterton. I think
Right.
he's straight up wrong. And he wasn't. To be fair to Chesterton, he was not an American, right?
Right. He was
So
English.
he was probably yeah, he was British, and he was probably correctly parroting what America was saying about itself at the time. The Statue of Liberty was like
Yep.
probably not that long before Chesterton, right? Uh, so I'm not saying that Chesterton like grabbed these ideas out of thin air. Uh, and I'm not judging him really harshly because, again, he's British, not American. But I don't agree with him. I don't think America's a church. And it's been quoted, and I think it's a very unfortunate thing because it's been quoted over and over and over and over and over again, right? So, Italian Catholics specifically, 'cause mostly Catholics, especially at the time. When I say mostly, I would guess you're probably at like 99%. Uh, of the Italians coming over would have been Catholic at the time,
Mm-hmm.
though I could be overshooting it a bit, but probably not by much. Uh, Italian Catholics are coming to America. Now, the question is, were the Italian immigrants actually good for America? Uh, I mean, we have an entire genre of movies based on how horrible they were because they formed mafiosos because they weren't being treated like real Americans by the rest of America, so they formed into families like the old country, maintain their connections with the old country, maintain their connection, as I do, with the old church, right? I'm not
Yep.
exempting myself from this, So, do I consider modern day Italians American? I think that the modern day Italian immigrant is a citizen of the nation of America in the same way that anybody could come to a foreign nation and become a citizen. Am I a part of the American heritage? No. My heritage is not American. It was never American. It was Italian.
Hmm.
And with me specifically, I could say like everybody in my family came from Italy. I'm one of the, our family line is going to be one of the last ones, like where all of us were from one country and Sicily, which is kind of its own thing, but whatever.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, Sicily and Italy, right? Our entire family line comes from that area. That is my heritage. That is my lineage. Those are my people. If I were to look back on the history, I cannot look back to the Revolutionary War and go, I'm so proud of what my fellow Americans did. I wasn't there. I had
Right.
nothing to do with it. I can't look back at the Civil War. I can't look back at, really, like, I'm pretty sure we came over. We probably came over a little bit. I'm trying to remember, like, dating here. We probably came over somewhere in between World War One and World War Two. That we might have had some people come before World War One. In my family, specifically, the point is, there's a large part of the heritage of America that I am not a part of. America can claim whatever it wants for itself. It can
Right.
claim that it's merely a church and that anybody who adopts its creed can be an American. But that doesn't mean that I still factually don't have a connection to the Revolutionary War, no matter how much I want one, no matter how much I agree with the founding fathers, which I admire many of those men greatly, right?
Right.
Many of them. George Washington is a personal hero of mine, has been for many years. I've studied him. I think he was a great man. But he's not an Italian hero. He's an American hero. He's not my hero. I don't have a connection to the things he did. My people did not fight for him. They did not fight with him. They did not fight for the cause that he fought for. They just
Right.
didn't. So Italians right now are citizens of the nation of America, which fundamentally makes us like long-term guests that are that are here as long as we are not as long as we're accepted. That's really that's really the long
Right.
and short of it. And again, I almost see this like less morally what we have the right to do and what should be done, and more factually. Factually, this is the case.
Hmm.
Morally, do I think it would be right to kick out all Americans or all Italians? I mean, well, no. In the same way, I don't think it would be right to kick out most immigrant groups. Uh, and for the record, I think that when we talk about like black people, it gets more complicated, but that's
Yeah.
a whole can of worms that's not worth talking about right now.
Not really. It's one of those things. It's like, yeah, there's like, okay, well, how do you distinguish between like the descendants of former slaves who actually, have a better claim than a whole bunch of other white groups because of their existence on the continent working in the American system. Famously, the architect of Washington, D.C., who first laid out its plans, was a black gentleman. So it's like, okay, there's something there. There were those who fought in the American Revolution, though not as many as Hollywood might want you to believe. So there's
Mm-hmm.
something more than Italians, but also, you know, how do I want to put it? Like at certain points, there's been less than again Hollywood would want you to believe, which is half of what we're fighting against, perceptions and whatnot. But there's pushing past, sort of like Chesterton. Like he has something of the right of it. Like he wouldn't like Chesterton seems like the type of guy that when he's that he wouldn't be as wrong as you ever think he is. Partially because America has been completely tied to Christianity its entire existence. Some would say, oh well, they're you know, Saint what is it? Saint Augustine, was founded as a Catholic thing on American. What's up, dude? Why are you looking in my window? Yeah, that's right. Keep walking.
I'm linking you an article by, it actually might be by Alquist, I'm not sure.
Anyway,
They don't say the author of the article, but
yeah,
where he gives the quote from Chesterton. It's from a 1922 book he wrote called What I Saw in America.
yes,
So he traveled to America and like gave his own thing. So,
yeah,
uh,
which is
so
a bit more than some authors have, but it's sorry, I have a big window and some dude was just like stopping, standing, looking at it. It's like, is that
so
my FBI agent? I don't know.
Chesterton's specific phrasing is America is the only nation in the world founded on a creed. He goes on to write about the questions he was asked when he entered, and I'm reading the summary from the article I linked to you.
Right.
When he entered the country, now they were kind of a test of that creed. In regards to these tests, he writes, now I am very far from intending to imply that these American tests are good tests or that there's no danger of tyranny becoming the temptation of America. Shall have something to say that later on about the temptation or tendency. Nor do I say that they apply consistently this conception of a nation with the soul of a church, protected by religious and not racial selection. If they did apply that principle consistently, they would have to exclude pessimists and rich cynics who deny the democratic ideal. An excellent thing, but a rather improbable one. What I say is that when we realize that this principle exists at all, we see the whole position in a totally different perspective. We say that the Americans are doing something heroic or doing something insane or doing it in an unworkable or unworthy fashion instead of simply wondering what the devil they are doing.
Hmm.
So I can understand once again, I think Chesterton was right about what Americans were saying about themselves at the time.
Yes.
I think that that was insane, number one. And number two, I don't think you could say that that's like what the founding fathers conceptualized America as. I don't think there's any evidence of that
Yeah.
to be frank.
The actual work of the founding fathers, they had a conception of themselves. I don't know if they would say like as a race like quasi French or whatever, but they had an idea of their posterity coming from them specifically. Like as in the descendants of those who fought in the revolution are Americans, and that they have specific chances, white skin, so on and so forth, uh, British descent, that makes them very specific. While we've always been more accepting of other nationalities, famously the guy who whipped the American army into shape, I believe, was he Prussian or Polish? I know there was a famous Polish
But I
officer,
think he was Prussian, Baron von,
Steuben.
I think Steuben.
Yep.
Yeah, and of course the Marquis de Lafayette.
Oh, and Marquis de Lafayette, a fantastic character.
Yeah, who was an American hero, and deservedly so.
Oh yes,
Um, there's so many great. Honestly, a lot of the early figures in American history were foreign, right?
right.
Baron von Steuben, Marquis de Lafayette, and the great John Paul Jones, who is the father of both the American and Russian navies.
Mm-hmm. I love John Paul Jones.
Oh,
What a
the
man.
Battle of the Bonhomme Richard is worthy of a later historical episode, cause it is so much fun to read about.
I have not yet begun to fight.
One
Woo!
of the great Chad lines that he wins the battle too is just the icing on the cake.
Yes. Oh, what a great guy. But yeah, my point is isn't some sort of weird philosophical argument. I'm saying that there is an explicit and concrete descent of Americans. I do believe that certain people, and this is a spirit more connected to the person than to the race or anything like that of the person discussing it, uh, can accept a sort of frontier spirit, which is the next point I want to make. The key aspect of the American isn't some sort of how do I want to put it? Because like the race of what would be called heritage Americans would embody this the best. Even heretics like the Mormons embodied it, of this frontier yearning, the Faustian
Hmm.
sort of goal for it. But I've seen others sort of like click with it, if that makes sense. You can be converted into striving for the infinite. Like, even though my mother's English, she doesn't experience that. Even besides being a woman, like, she just doesn't experience the sort of strive for, infinite struggle
Yeah.
upwards. But my dad did. He failed, but he did experience it.
See, it's interesting because when I think of like, do I experience this personally? Um, I go back and forth on it, right?
Right.
I think part of it, and for people who are, uh, who am I kidding? There's nobody new here. Hi, old viewers. Uh,
We love
anyway,
you.
yes. Anyway, for I think of like the sociosexual hierarchy scale, which like we've talked about before. I find it a useful heuristic,
Mm.
uh, which is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a heuristic that is useful if used correctly, and I think about how with myself, you need to be very careful because your opinion of yourself is the least important one, and people will tend to overrate themselves. But I think I'm pretty clearly a delta, and statistically, that is the most likely thing as well because
Mm.
most people are. So I think I'm safe in saying that most of the time, right?
Yes.
Now, if I'm pretty clearly a delta, my ambitions are not going to be as high as an alpha, sigma, or even a bravo.
Right.
My and throughout my life, they quite simply never have been. I can tell you factually. If you were to, this is where you get like the whole "I just want to grill" meme. That comes from deltas primarily,
Yes.
right? And even though I would never say something that uh,
Banal.
and I know that like we're memeing here and there jokes, so I'm trying to actually make a serious point with it too,
Right. Right.
which is why it's like kind of difficult. But like, I would never say something like that. But the reason I wouldn't say that is not because I don't understand the appeal. I actually do. It's because I'm not naive enough to think that it would ever end there.
Right.
But I do understand the appeal because, frankly, like, this has always really been what I wanted. Like, what is the extent of my ambitions? I don't really care about being rich. It is simply not something that's ever mattered to me. it's never, I not a hint in my mind has it. Like, there's no appeal to having a ton of money. In fact, I have a sort of horror for like the super rich. I remember there was a moment where there was like, I think we had this discussion once actually, but it was years ago. So it's probably
Mm,
one of those things that stuck out in my mind and did not stick in in yours. Uh, where there was like a record-breaking lottery.
yes.
Yeah, several. I think it was like several multi-million dollars or something, and I thought nicely about like it would be cool to win it for a moment, and then I felt a sort of horror, and it made me think of Goldwater in and which they call Deathwater in Voyage of the Dawn Treader,
Oh, yes.
which is one of the best scenes, by the way, in Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Very good
Uh,
scene.
Brilliant scene in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. They come upon an island with a lake that turns anything that's put into it into gold, and they realize that that will give them unimaginable wealth. And then Edmund and Caspian start fighting over it until Aslan comes and literally wipes their memory of it, because if they know what it is, there is no way that they won't fight over it. The temptation is too strong,
Yep.
which is fascinating. Like, that's what the lottery ticket reminded me of. Now, I talk to other people and I say that like winning that lottery actually like the thought excited me for a moment, and then I got like sick. It horrified me. And
Mm-hmm.
other people did not understand what I was talking about. Like, I would bring it up to them, they would go, I don't get it. Like, what about it? I don't understand.
Right.
And I think there are going to be people who get that and people who don't.
And it's
Yeah.
it's like let's just go over it real quick, for a dude's perspective. Without effort, except for the $2 to buy that, Powerball ticket or whatever, you get the house you want, the car you want, that ultra gaming rig in every game whenever you want it. You'll find love, and she's real interested in you, and she just doesn't love you for your money. But it's weird how a girl of her standard never talked to you beforehand. Your
Hmm.
relatives keep asking you for money, and you just love helping them. But they get real angry when you just decide you don't want to help them with their thing that isn't very important. You keep buying houses for your relatives, but they don't really show up to your parties without asking you for something. You keep on, worrying about money, but at the same time, you've still got more money than you can comprehend. You could literally swim in it like Scrooge McDuck, but you're just not happy. And then, as you're laying in bed, your phone rings. Hey, cuz, could you get me a new car? I just wrecked mine. What do you mean you won't buy me a new car? Listen, cuz, haven't I always been there for you? And it goes on. And the phone call lasts until 4 a.m. You don't get any sleep, really, cuz you get another call tomorrow. That's what's going to happen when you win that lottery and you're, a normal person. Like, let's say, I've bought lottery tickets for the $1 billion lottery just because I think it's hilarious that there's $1 billion that some person's just randomly going to get. It is immensely amusing to me. It's like it's like bidding on a genie's lamp. You don't really expect to get it, but man, you know, if
Yeah,
that's the best way I can put it. You're bidding on a genie's lamp, and
I
somebody's
bring this up though to be like, I don't. But when I think of like what would do I want to be great? And I would go, that's not something that's ever been particularly important to me, in the sense of like, I don't need to be the I don't need to be rich. I don't need to have a high status or anything like that. I would like to master certain skills for my own
yes,
benefit, but the flip side of this too is that, on the other hand, space travel, like all good men, has always fascinated me.
yes,
Uh, Always will. I did see someone who I quite like, Eric Ibarra, claim that he thought that the American attitude towards space travel, he lists it in a list of, like, he goes, knowingly unpopular opinions that nobody agrees with him about. So, in all fairness, I do want to preface it with that. Like, if you were to say, dude, I think you're an idiot, he would probably be like, yeah, everybody does. Um, but he thought it was like the desire for colonization of other planets was sort of like the impulse of the Tower of Babel.
Ooh.
Uh, literally had never considered that concept before, and as I think about it, I don't think I agree.
Hmm.
But I think anything can be, if you're trying to
Yeah.
usurp God. But I don't think that if God gave us the ability to do this, then we're not doing anything wrong in exercising that ability as long as we don't act immorally.
When he said, we have stewardship over the earth, did he really mean creation to people who could not comprehend of planets?
Yeah, it's odd.
Yeah.
But anyway, like space travel fascinates me. It's one of the few things where you'd be like, the childhood dream of like, would you want to be an astronaut? To this day, that's still something I would not. I understand it
Yeah.
completely. The idea even of like as difficult as it would be, of as boring, frankly, as it would be, if you were to offer me the opportunity to go into space, I would probably take it
Oh, yeah. And
even if I were just like on the space station doing nothing, right?
and
Because
the
there's something romantic enough about it that does strike a chord with me.
yeah. And there's a how do I put it? That's a very American opinion, if you get me. It's one of
Mm,
those things where it's like the secret to America is that frontier, to the American spirit. It's why I'm a little bit more, shall we say, cosmopolitan about what makes up an American than others. Not that I'll ever say that they're a heritage American. I use that term very specifically. But in the sense of like it's a spirit that can be inherited. Like Ben, what would you actually do with $1 billion? I'd be investing in things, and if there's ever an actual ticket to go into space, I'm taking it. Like that like it's like what do you like all true Americans, it's like, so what do you do with all this money? I buy a ticket to space, and right now we're not really doing that, but with in our lifetimes we can be doing that again. It depends on how much Trump improves things, quite frankly, how much God allows him to improve things. I don't think God's done with America. But I do think that our inability to really go for frontiers, like we used to, has sort of severed an aspect of our worship of God. I called this stream, sort of like is God a God of war, and that was being provocation. I don't, believe that, as I said, but I do believe that God makes the nations, and God allows them to get into conflict because of the sin that we have in this world. We're not perfect beings. We don't have that perfected nature yet. Therefore, we have war with us forever. Cain killed Abel. Over God's favor. Um, he was unrighteous for it, but at the same time, it's how do I want to put it? Like God seems like I want to be very careful with how I said it because I've thought about it, but I've never studied it. God seems perturbed with the murder of Abel, not with the cause of the murder of Abel. Does that make sense, Anthony? Not and perturbed.
uh,
I shouldn't say perturbed. But he's angry at Cain for murdering Abel, not for the cause of murdering Abel. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to work out what that means,
As
and I'm
in
having
like,
trouble with it.
sometimes there are verses that say you war over money, and your greed, this. You know, like he criticizes people, nations, whatever, for their greed, and then says you war because of your greed. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I think I get what you're saying.
And so I'm saying that from what I'm remembering, and I've never really studied this because I'm speaking this thought fully formed, uh, at this unscripted moment. I've always it's kind of always feels weird. It's like, why didn't you criticize Cain for not worshiping you right? Well, no, he did that when, he blessed Abel. It was already established that Cain was worshiping God wrong and Abel was worshiping God correctly. So when God shows up, Cain already knows what he was doing wrong. God doesn't need to hash it out already. In reality, it's about the murder of Abel. It's about the not April. She's lovely. Don't worry about it. Stay away from people cocaine.
Mhm.
Uh, Abel. So it's the murder that matters in that moment. His sin being murder from the jealousy of who God favored. And at points you could say, well, Cain and Abel could have shared and shared alike, but I think the purpose wasn't about that sort of thing. It was about how the person of Cain relates to God. In the end, he wasn't willing to say to Abel, "I know that God has established a sacrifice of blood for the forgiveness of sins. Brother, would you sacrifice a sheep for me too?" Which Abel, if he was a holy man, and I think he was, would have done so. Uh, um, but at the same time, it's the reason why it's bringing up to my mind is because I've never just been satisfied with the church being the only way to worship God. David would go went around singing and praising God. He wrote some of his best psalms on the run. Therefore, he wasn't like worshiping at the tabernacle like he was supposed to all the time because of the circumstances around his life. Does that make sense? Not that
Yeah.
if given a choice, he would of course worship at the tabernacle, but he didn't always have a choice in that. And I think that there's an idea that's lost there that people either take too far, like with, like during hunting season, a lot of rural churches are just empty. And the pastor's probably hunting too. Like that isn't the same thing as what I'm talking about. It's a spirit of the worship of God that, flows through us into everything that we're doing. And I think that America's purpose was to tame a frontier, and that now that we've tamed that frontier, God's not abandoned us or anything like that, but it's a change of mode. Like, um, there's uh, I was thinking about some things about in the Old Testament about the diaspora of Israel into the heathen nations. And one of the things I kind of thought about was that uh, God knows that they're going to betray him and worship in high places and balls and stuff. But also, and so he knows that he's going to have to diasporize them eventually to get them back to him. But at the same
Well,
time,
God knows everything. Yes.
yeah. But yeah, but like, give me a second. uh, but at the same time, he treats their sin in the moment of sin rather than as a foregone conclusion except by prophecy. Um, like ignoring prophecy, we're talking like, he's going to Hezekiah, after he shows the Babylonian guys around, oh, I'm so rich, I'm so wealthy, and God's like, dude, that was unacceptable. I'm going to take all this from you, but not in your time. I'm going to take it from your kids, sort of thing. Like he deals with the sin. Hezekiah had the choice to sin. God still knew the choice that he would make, sin or not sin. And so I'm thinking, like, does God? So, and God gave like golden ages to civilizations that never even conceived of him. The Moabites even hated him and his people, and they still became wealthy from the natural world around them and so on. So there's clear, God's hand is over the nations as much as anything else. Therefore, God's hand is over our nation as well to make it rise and fall. And it's like there's for a lot of the well, not a lot of them, but for some like American philosophers I've read, there's always this going back to the frontier, this idea that we had vitality with the frontier, that we, were closer to God in the frontier. It's like some washed up 50-year-old. Yeah, man, back in college I was fit, I had money, I was closer to God, like that sort of, like it's sort of like that sort of whining. But not really, but it's like, did if we had kept up into space, excuse me, I've still got phlegm. My goodness. Uh, if we had kept up into space, would God have continued to bless our nation? Because as things go, people say, "Well, God bless us because we supported Israel." But frankly, I don't really believe that because He was blessing us well before Israel ever existed. He blessed Spain after they completed the Reconquista and then expelled all the Jewry who wouldn't convert. Um, and then persecuted those who pretended to be Christian but kept up their Judaism. So it's clear that whatever people say about that verse, that there's actually a deeper truth that God acts on, and it isn't as binary as whether or not you're pro-Israel or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There are discussions about this a lot, and there seems to be. I don't agree with the assumption that we need to treat Israel in some sort of special way from the rest of the modern world. People will talk about fulfillment of a prophecy about Israel's return in Isaiah. The problem is the prophecy of return that Isaiah is talking about is a return of the kingdom of Israel. The modern nation state of Israel is quite clearly not that. They're not a kingdom. They don't have a son of David on the throne. The
Mm.
last time that Israel, and you could say, well, Christ is ruling, and you'd be correct, 'cause Christ rules everyone, but they don't acknowledge his leadership, which is a grave, grave error
They'd be
that they
actually
will.
aggressively against it.
Hmm. And they will be, and they're going to and have paid for this error. In fact, the payment for this error was pretty explicitly the destruction of the Jerusalem temple.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't. I will say that I've read up on this, and I have been convinced that the arguments that the Holocaust was punishment for the rejection of Christ, I don't agree with. Not because I think that that's impossible. I don't.
Mm.
Uh, but I think that it is very clear in the New Testament that the punishment for the rejection of Christ was the destruction of the temple, which is
Yes.
actually a much worse spiritual catastrophe to the Jews than the Holocaust.
Well, it's like I read an article recently that said that the Wailing Wall was actually just the wall of a Roman fort.
I saw that too, and I find that quite plausible, honestly.
Yeah.
Not that it really matters to me either way.
No, but
Uh,
it's like,
but
so traumatizing that they're worshiping at the wall of an enemy, fortress is, there's something to it. I don't know what, and I don't want to even
yes.
think
So
about it, but it's
where I'm
like,
going with this is that it's funny because like people will then ask me, go like, "Are you anti or pro Israel?" No, I'm not anti-Israel actually. If you were to ask me if I were a Zionist, I would say probably yes, in the sense that I think that the modern state of Israel's existence is a good thing overall. Do I agree with everything they've been doing? No, I. But in the same way that I would say that about a lot of nations, right?
mm,
It's not really specific to Israel, except my opinion on Gaza is not full, but it kind of is summed up by JD Vance, who cut off a reporter and then said, "I don't care about Afghans, Margaret." Uh, and that's kind of my opinion on Gaza, where you go like, "So are you in favor of the genocide in Gaza?" It's like I want to cut you off and be like, "I don't care about Gazans, Margaret." but I also don't care about Israelis, Margaret.
What?
Like
Yeah.
whatever is going on in the Middle East, I hope they work it out. That's really my opinion. But it kind of goes to the modern nation state of Israel is clearly not what Isaiah was talking about.
Right.
Because what Isaiah was talking about was the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. And the last king of Israel, there is a king of Israel. We can't have another king of Israel because the king of Israel is alive. It's
Yes.
Christ. And this is a very important point that should not be forgotten, especially by Christians. Christ is not dead. He
Yep.
is not dead. He is alive. One of the and this has like more than just a. I'm not just making a spiritual thing. I'm not trying to make you go like hallelujah, God's alive. Like no, the king is alive. He is reigning currently. He is not going to reign. He is reigning.
Yes.
And more than that, if you read, I read a very interesting article on this recently. I'll try and link it to you, Ben.
Ooh.
If you read the accounts of the ascension, one thing that you need to understand about the ascension is that the disciples understood the ascension not as Jesus leaving, but as Jesus becoming more present. He's
Mm-hmm.
going home to his father. Like they said, if you read the accounts, the way that they react does not make sense if Jesus is simply leaving in
Yep.
like full stop because they celebrate. They go to the temple and worship God. In
Yep.
fact, why would they go to the temple if Jesus just ascended? Because Jesus is God. But yeah,
Yes.
but thing like the way that they react is it's very clear that they don't consider Christ to be gone in any meaningful way. Now, will he return bodily? Will he return and, bring judgment to his enemies and end time, right? And usher
Mm-hmm.
in a new heaven and earth? Yes, that is going to happen. But that's the next thing that Christ, the living Christ, is going to do.
Yes.
It's not the return in the sense of he's no longer present. He is present. He just hasn't fulfilled the next stage of his plan yet.
Right.
And this is a very, very important thing to keep in mind. I don't. If Israel does get a king, then that king is going to be a blasphemous king. Uh, at best, he would be. The closest thing that we have to that on Earth today is something like the Pope, who specifically calls himself the Vicar of Christ. If there is a king of Israel that says, "I am the king of Israel," we have we would. I think we would have to reject him.
Yep.
I'm
At
trying to
at the
think this
cost
over.
of
I don't know
everything.
what.
Yeah. Like.
Yeah, I don't know what the churches would do genuinely. Like, I'm not sure
Mm.
what the theolo. But my first impression, at least, without thinking over this very hard, is that we would have to reject a king of Israel because the king of Israel is alive
Yes.
and he is currently reigning, and they don't recognize him. They do not recognize explicitly reject the king of Israel. So with that in mind, I fail to see what why I'm supposed to be treating this ethno state that rejects Christ explicitly any differently than any other ethno state. I think it's
Yeah.
good that it exists. I also think there's probably going to be a role to play at one point, but this is where it gets kind of complicated because I'm getting in discussions with people who are talking about this, and they're saying things like, "Oh, well, they're acting as stewards for Israel until Jesus Christ's return and ultimate, and second coming." But that doesn't really make sense because they're not acting as stewards. They're actually doing the opposite. They
Mm-hmm.
should be acting as stewards. That is the role that they should be taking, but they're not. They're explicitly not. If you
Yes.
were to ask them if that's what they were doing, they would say they would be offended. They would say 100% no. The foundation of the state of Israel is not why. Now, could God use it in that way later? Of course he can. God could do whatever he wants. In fact, I suspect he will, to be frank. But that doesn't really have anything to do with how we should treat the Jews right now and the
Right.
Jewish state of Israel right now. I shouldn't say the Jews, I should say the Israeli
Right.
specifically. And by the way, we're going to loop around here because this goes back to some really interesting things. There are Jews I know, some of them Messianic Jews, who I like, who I get along with and I respect, and who have admitted that they have considered moving to Israel from America because, they're Jewish.
Eh,
And
right.
I think that they're not doing anything wrong. In fact, I would argue they're doing something explicitly right in doing this. If they see themselves as Jews, they shouldn't be living in America. But my point is that there is a contradiction when you could say to such a you could ask such a person, "Do you consider yourself American?" And they would tell you yes.
Right.
If you are willing to move to a foreign nation and live there as a citizen and you believe that is your birthright, you can't also claim that you are a citizen of the United States. You
Yes.
need to, at the very least, renounce your citizenship of one or the other country. Hopefully, President Trump ends the
Dual
evil
citizenship.
practice of, yeah, dual citizenship. He
Mm.
ends the evil practice of dual citizenship. I know dual citizens, but here's the thing, it's not limited to Jews. I know Italians who have dual citizenship. I don't think that they're wrong in wanting Italian citizenship. I think they're wrong in trying to play both sides.
Right. Very
And I think
Italian.
that,
Uh,
yeah, right. Um, but no, really though, I
yes.
think that is wrong. Very Jewish, but uh,
Woo-hoo-hoo.
I think that is wrong.
Yes, it is wrong.
It,
Like it's an evil for a reason, because it means that people who you think are your national brothers are, essentially double agents who will side whichever side that they want at any given time. Like it's like, how can you trust such a person? You can't. You know, if somebody is saying, well, like with my mother, she's English. I've said this on this show before. I tell her, it's like, look, Ma, you're English. Like, you don't get it. You don't get the American system. How things going, the spirit of it, because there is a very strong, specific spirit that is with the Americans. It's that frontier mindset, that Faustian sort of reach for the infinite. To stir the stars into fertility, that we could have had. It's why I'm conflicted about what to think about, say, the specifically not African Americans in general, but specifically the descendants of former slaves, because they were against space travel in general. Now there have been plenty of black astronauts, and they've done good work, I'm sure. Um, but it's how do I want to put this? It's the exceptional among them, not necessarily the rule among them. What can we do as Americans to understand that? What is the core of what God wants us to do as a race? As a nation. I want to say race, but it's like not as, Anthony gets it better than, some African Americans I've known, even some heritage Americans I've known. Like, if you have the ticket to space, you just take it. You don't care. Like, that's the whole thing. Uh, I'm just gonna close up my windows at some point. Uh, because people are making an uncomfortable amount of eye contact when they're walking by. And I don't have it open either. I want to be clear on that. Anyway, uh, there's a specific. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to describe an elephant, and I'm a blind man. Uh, the I know that God created, the different nations and their courses and their mindsets and stuff like that. We are all emanations from Adam, but at the same time, God clearly, delighted in making different types of people. Uh, you know, There's a quote, from Nietzsche or something. The Persians like to shoot straight and speak the truth, ride well. The Germans, the ideal German is to command and to be commanded. That sort of thing. That doesn't come from nowhere. We didn't get a mix of 23% Neanderthal and 13% Cro-Magnon, and the rest is Homo erectus, and that's your German. That's ridiculous nonsense. Fox Day has just been stomping the myth of evolution into the ground, just with the math of it. Turns out you need billions and billions of years just to get even, like a percentage of the small percentage of the species differentiation that we experience now. They but to give up evolution even when it's untenable, or even just to push it to the extreme where it's ridiculous and no one would be willing to believe it, um, is beyond them, because it means that they're wrong, and they have to accept that there is a creator who at the very least guided us through evolution, much less created things whole in their time. uh, if is the American experience in the living or in the striving, and I don't mean negative striving, but good striving. Is the American experience in the what is it, 6x6 or something like that, town breakdown with the church in the center? I would say that that's actually more accurate. America's frontier was founded church first. You had sure people who made up their farmsteads, but the nation isn't in the farmers as much as people want to think. Sure, there were many prestigious and noble farmers in Roman history, as an example. But at the same time, the armies came from the cities. The main citizenry came from the cities, and eventually the cities became corrupt and they could no longer do that. The farming elite that they pulled from, just disappeared because it became all, the moneyed elite. But at the same time, it's the masses of people that fought in their nations and wars were from, the cities themselves, the cities of Rome. And so America's existence is also tied up with the Roman city. Even though England itself was also very pasteurized, with many farmers and stuff like that. In the end, many of the leaders that came up, into prominence, beyond the nobility, like say men like Oliver Cromwell, they may have farms, almost everyone did, but at the same time, he was a man of business. He had plebeian things that he was getting up to. He participated in local politics. He was a gentleman. It came from more than the farming and the livestock, that he may or may not have raised. I couldn't tell you what he grew or raised. I just know, that he had such a thing. It was, his interactions with other people in a political experience that had him, act in the way that he acted. When men came up to, go to the Revolutionary War, they may have done so in secret to fight for their nations, and they did come from farms. But many of the inciting incidents and where the men gathered to discuss the nation were in the cities themselves, in Philadelphia and Boston and other places. The heritage of America may have been with the farmer in the general population, but its soul, its focus, is from its cities. People. The reason why we vote on Tuesdays is because it took time for people to get to the polls. You know, People didn't go to them in the farms. The people in the farms came to the nation. Um, People look down on farming in some ways. People look up to farming in others. But fundamentally, the people who were there, in the farms, are too innumerous and scattered to really form a nation without points where the nation can gather together both to worship God in a church and to make national decisions. When it comes to things like monarchies, which I know probably a few of our people in our fan base are fans of monarchies, the issue doesn't come from the fact that there is, one king or his agents and there's only so many agents, so therefore actually you were relatively freer under a monarchy than just about, any of the other ones, because how many people can rule as a monarch? Um, in reality, it was the person of the king coalesce the nation around himself so that other English people, like whatever they thought about Henry VIII, frankly, they followed him into Protestantism. Even though he was, not that it was bloodless or anything ridiculous like that. I'm not saying it was easy. I'm just saying that because he demanded this path for the nation received this path. Now, England always had their heretics, and quite a few reformers came from England. Um, oh my goodness, I'm blanking out on his name. He was the 13th British Bible translator, 13th century. Um,
Tyndale?
no, Tyndale was after that. Uh, oh my goodness. And I love this guy
I'm
too.
not
Hold on.
sure.
I got it. Hold on. I got a early incomplete. Uh, King Alfred had the Pentateuch translated into Old English. That's pretty cool.
That's dope.
I know, right?
Did you
Great.
know that there is a J.R.R. Tolkien translation of the Book of Jonah, and you can find it online fairly easily?
Nice. Uh, nice. Oh, William
I,
Tyndale did
I
translate something. I thought he was just a translator. Sorry, distributor. Um,
I just found that really interesting
that's pretty cool.
when I learned it.
I'm really annoyed I can't find this. Um,
It's fine. Just move on.
yeah, fine. Yeah. But point is that there were plenty of English reformers, translators, people who would later be called heretics, um, you know, uh, and be tried for it. When the Counter Reformation really started up, or even a few years after their lifetime, when pardon Anthony, but the Roman Catholic Church was calcifying. Um, it's it's what I'm trying to say is that the kernel of the nation is more than just the people, it's how the people interact with the nationhood. When the Persians just summoned up endless legions from its many satrapies, that is not the same as nationhood. That's empire. you know, Persians, as I'll quote Nietzsche again, speak truth, shoot an arrow straight and ride well. You know, their people had a specific idea to them. Maybe they made up the immortals, but they didn't, they weren't the masses, that you saw thrown into the grinder of the 300s. Um, you have, for Americans anyway, it's Wycliffe, by the way. Uh,
Wycliffe, yes.
yes,
Okay.
Wycliffe. For Americans, because we are new in the grand scheme of things, uh, Americans sort of can do national things more consciously than other nations have in the past. I would say that the idea of a British nation was nascent in the consciousness and formed around works of art like the Canterbury Tales, um, Pilgrim's Progress, but most importantly, King Arthur. And that wasn't in any timeline order. I just mentioned them with King Arthur in its prominence. King Arthur made the English aware of their nationhood, and even though it's like anti-Saxon, anti-Norman, anti this, anti that, the enemy of this or that. Arthur goes down to conquer Rome. Fundamentally, there's an idea of Britishness, of Englishness, that is maintained within King Arthur's stories, that fill the heart of every true-born Englishman, and even many Americans too. Because Americans, when they were founded, were both incredibly educated and aware of many political tropes that were discussed by Aristotle in Plutarch's Lives. They were very educated on the histories. Just because we know what the bread was made up of in ancient Rome doesn't mean we know more than they did. They had Plutarch's Lives. That's actually how the important people of Rome lived, and that's more important than a whole lot of other information that you could know about their like drainage systems. Lead poisoning, that's cool. They still had lead poisoning when they founded the empire. I don't know what you guys want. So it's because there was a conscious knowledge of the political elements that make up a nation. They could forge it, sort of like speed run it. I guess that's a way to put it. You had people who were specifically from two different parts of England, the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, essentially, who agreed to form one nation even if they had their disagreements. And they could go for national identity while at the same time expanding into sort of like the American manifest destiny. I don't want to say like diaspora or anything like that, but it's a manifest destiny. They could go from Boston all the way to San Diego and it still be America. It's with recognizable American traits and laws and people and mores that they all agreed to. And even other races within America, could also agree to. This may be a little bit, esoteric, but outside of the very impoverished areas, African Americans were doing quite well for themselves. They were, factory workers, sure, like lower middle class, but they were doing very well for themselves compared to any other nation on earth at the time. Drugs, bad cultural decisions, an inability to rein themselves in, really started hurting them and destroying their ability to work as a nation together, with the heritage Americans. Really sort of set them apart to what we see today, where there's almost no shared American experience between heritage Americans and African Americans, even though they've been here long. I have an easier time relating to them than I can, say, Vietnamese Americans, quote unquote Vietnamese Americans, quote unquote, all these different types of Americans, Hispanics and so on, who aren't Americans at all, really. But it's still difficult. Like, what can be done? Do we want to, have these issues? And as culture degrades, the antibodies degrade. We can't have the nation we had before. Is it a curse from God, or is it something more real? More, sorry, not more real as in God's not real, but in the sense of, when Watto, from Star Wars Episode 1 goes, Republic credits, I don't know, though we can't spend those here, I need something more real, something I can move, hold on. I have a couple of bicentennial cores, little money or something like that. Not real compared to God, but real, because I need to eat. Um, what, is it just policy or is it a curse? At a certain point, is God angry? Even though we're removing abortion protections, you know, there was still like, from what Brian Niemeyer says, Generation X was basically gutted by abortion. Like, and it makes sense. Quite frankly, Generation X is I don't want to say they're losers or anything, but they're, more likely to be cucked than a lot of other ones. With Gen Y, it's the same thing. It's not like abortion disappeared between Gen X and Gen Y. And the same thing with when it comes to like the African American community. They aborted like crazy. immense levels of abortion within their communities. Is God cursing them for their abortion? Did we lose the mandate for the frontier, not because of some political action like civil rights, but because God saw the writing on the wall and didn't want, people who would sacrifice their children on an altar to be the ones to bring the stars to life? Um, that's like it, it it feels bad in my heart to say it. Not in the sense of I'm blaspheming, but in the sense of, is this why we're tormented in our time? That we need, frankly, as much as I love him, a shyster like Trump, who is, who was for most of his life more concerned with his image than a, true product. There's some ridiculous stories out there of scams that he's thrown his face onto. And that's our national leader, as much as I love what he's doing. I think maybe Melania calmed him down quite a bit. But
Although Melania, even though
Melania,
she
thank you.
claims, yeah, Melania, even though she claims to be Catholic, released a book just before the election. Basically, that was like, yeah, we're not gonna be pro-life. It was
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. And it's difficult. Like I know, like in Pinkerton's Ghosts, I'll make it, with that for those who know. With Pinkerton's Ghosts, Mother Morrow's explicit choice, her most moral moment, is when she realizes that baby Jack, who she's just given birth to and about to throw to the fire, is a precious life. That she cannot do this. And so instead of, anything else, she grabs the baby and flings herself out to the mercies of God. And God is, of course, merciful. There's, I did that specifically. I made that the issue because, it was unconscious. But in thinking over my reasoning for why I perform certain actions in my art, it's because I know fundamentally that abortion is the key issue of the souls of Americans. And I don't mean that in a sort of like facetious way, right? I am being as explicit as I can. How in the world can God bless a nation of baby killers? Well, you might say, well, I would never do that. I would never do this. Right. Like sure. But the thing is that there were probably godly men who knew of God in places like Moab and Edom, right? They couldn't all have been Baal worshippers. They couldn't all have been hating on the Lord God in a way that he describes. They were way too close to Israel. They had they were interacting with people. Jonah, we mentioned Jonah earlier. Like the second that Jonah completes his speeches, the population of the Assyrians, who, let's be real, the only comparison for the Assyrians for other nations are like Aztecs. Like they were bloody, vicious bastards to every nation who ever crossed them. They explicitly had it as their national character to go to war whenever possible. You, like it goes like they had like human skin shields, piles of skulls, and when they hear that God is displeased with them and that they must repent or be destroyed, fall on their knees, sackcloth and ashes. It doesn't last forever, but for that generation, they repent. Like, uh, you know, you know, they're, how do I want to put it? There's there's deeper spiritual truths that run the world we live in. There's more things than dreamed of in your philosophies, Horatio. The world is not just stuff. There's a spirit that yearns for God and recognizes God that can be violated. Jonah may have had them repent in their generation, but that generation didn't last forever. And of course, the Assyrians were later destroyed by the Babylonians. To the point where Xenophon, I think it's Xenophon, finds the monoliths of Nineveh and has no clue who they are. It's like they were wiped away, like sand in the desert. Um, you know, if we call ourselves righteous before God, if our nation's being brought closer to God, does that mean that it's about the president? Is it about this or that? Frankly, I think the only way for us, is to fully remove abortion, to sort of realign ourselves with those frontier values, rather than is it aristocratic, comrade, to have this many children? When actuality, the average American woman was having like 8 to 12 babies a year. No, not a year, but like 8 to 12 children in their lifetimes. And most of those survived because Americans were actually pretty good doctors compared to other places. Um, you know, it's like the abortion thing. Like it's clearly a linchpin. They're, spiritually speaking, they're clearly sacrifices to Satan. They're clearly destroying uh, uh, Americans' relationship with God. If I went into a mega church and I, polled everybody, would it be majority abortion or anti-abortion? Would it be pro-life or anti-life? I would say that the majority of some places, depending on what part of the nation you're in, certain mega churches would be entirely pro-death. Other places would be entirely pro-life, depending on the politics. If you walked into, like, I don't want to punch down on Catholics, but it's like, whatever church Nancy Pelosi goes into, do you think their priest, she'd go to that church if the priest was willing to make a stand against abortion? Or,
Hmm.
some sort of senator who's, so pro-Israel, he weeps at the idea of Hamas or something. Do you think when he goes to his pastor, you think his pastor's going to criticize Israel? Is going to say, hey, we have to, make ourselves right before God? No. You know, it's all one of those things where it's like there's a connection between your relationship with God and your opinion on abortion. How can you inhabit a frontier when you're unwilling to populate it?
Yeah, and I would also this is a sign for everybody listening. If you've never done any work involved with fighting abortion, you really should.
Mm,
If you think that abortion is the most important issue in the country, which I do, Ben does, as he said, as he's
mm.
explained here, if you think it is really that important, what are you waiting for? That is one
Yep.
of the things that we've organized extremely well. Is we there are concrete actions that you can take right now, today, or at least since it's late tomorrow,
Mm.
if you're on the East Coast, uh, that you can do that would have a tangible impact on the pro-life movement,
Yep.
and you should do them. This is a conviction. I'm like genuinely calling people out here. Are you one of those people who says that the pro-life movement is the most important in the country? If you are, why haven't you done anything yet?
Yep.
Because there are things that you can do right now. Ben knows this. I've done it. It was during a short period. It was a short period of time. It wasn't, and I would probably, and I'll probably do it again in the future. It was a harrowing experience. It was a moving experience. I did sidewalk counseling.
Mm.
I'm very grateful that I did it, and I will hopefully be doing something like it again one day. But it's I think that anybody who calls themselves pro-life should do something like that at some point. Even if all you're willing to do, you don't want to approach people, stand in front and pray.
Yep. Guess what?
And
People got pardoned for their prosecutions over this issue. You know, like it's
yes.
nowhere near as dangerous as it used to be. You
And
know, like
also, for the record, it was never really all that dangerous. Those were very like no, I'm being serious. Like
yes.
this is a serious thing. I like, and to be clear, I was there when the police did get called on us.
right,
The police, we were not arrested.
right.
Um, but I was there. It's like it happens. It 100% does happen. But most of the times, if you know your law, you're probably not going to get in trouble. You just need to simply follow the laws, and if that means you got to be distance away, then that's what you do. You know, this was a multi. It was a entirely Christian, but it was multi. It was a multi-Christian group. There were the Protestants and the Catholics came together and did this. We had different approaches.
Mm.
Uh, I yeah, I'm not going to go into all of it, but my point is that you really, really should do something, even if it's just standing in front and praying. And that's one of the things where someone is going to call you a fool for if that's all that you do, and that's a person who does not believe in God anyway, and so it doesn't matter. Standing in front and praying will help.
Yep.
It's going to it is the right thing to do. It is a good thing on its own. If you can do more than that, great. But even just standing in front and praying, and don't think you could just pray at home. You can,
Yeah.
but this is one of the great errors of the modern world. Like location, physical location, and proximity does matter. It does make a difference.
Yep. It's and it's like, well, I don't know about like me in Missouri, the abortion clinics are closed down or supposed to be anyway. Like guess what? I've counseled people to keep children. It's easy. I did it on the job too. It's like, how do I want to put it? If you look for opportunities, you'll have it. In
Mm-hmm.
my case, I told some people, hey, look, you're not going to talk about that around me. This is evil. I don't want to hear about how you need an abortion or something. It was a gay guy talking to a woman, who was conflicted about it. That's disgusting. You need to get away from me. The life is worth it. I've talked to other people in similar ways. Again, more on the job than I'd tell an
There's
HR.
also the fact, by the way, when you're actually there and you're seeing these people in person, so many things become clear and
Mm,
slot in place that you did not consider. And like, the whys and the how. Like, for example, one thing that would not have occurred to me but did now that I've actually done it is that the main reason I this is going to, and I've said this to you, Ben. I don't think I've said it on air though. It's gonna sound weird, but one of the biggest reasons that there are so many abortions is that, quite genuinely, so many people are so much more stupid than you realize.
mm-hmm.
And this sounds bizarre to say. It's like, so what do you mean by that? Like, I'll explain. What I mean is, I remember there was like a young teenage girl. Her father was there. We actually she was there for like just an appointment. She wasn't getting the abortion that day, but she was planning on getting one at some point. The father was clearly uncomfortable with it, but this was like a 15-year-old girl. He was over his head. He didn't know
Yes.
what to do or what his options were. He was just trying to be supportive. You felt bad for the guy, right?
Hmm.
And uh, we all like everybody talked to him, was giving him options. He was very receptive. There was some hope with that girl, but so hopefully that worked out. But one of the things you guys like, are you Catholic? Yes. You you know the Catholic Church is against abortion, right? Really? But like completely, like you'll see people who will have rosaries to get abortions, and we're like, I'm sorry, Catholic? Yeah, I'm Catholic. What are you doing? It's like, what do you mean? It's
Ugh.
like you know that the Catholic Church is against abortion, yes? Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, there is no way that this is true. But what you fail to understand is just much how stupid people genuinely are.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are people, they're Catholic, they go to church, they don't listen to a word that is said in the church.
Well, maybe they had Dr. James Martin as a priest. Perhaps he was the one who happened to be preaching on the pulpit on Easter
I
Sunday.
think it's more. I understand the joke, and yes, but I think it's more that these are people who are like their families were Catholic. They go to church. Sure, they like being Catholic. Like
Yeah.
it's a family thing. It's a cultural thing. You got nice statues. You got nice churches. You can pray. Everybody comes together. You baptize the babies. It's a big party. But as far as like what the moral obligations of Catholicism are, it's just simply not talked about ever. Ever.
Yep.
Like really not even hinted at or mentioned. And in this case, like the reason I'm saying that's because these people are stupid is that one thing that we like I think even, any Protestant would have to admit, and I've seen Protestants and even Orthodox admit, is that the Catholic Church is at the forefront of the pro-life movement.
Yes.
They always have been. They've been very, very public about this. For you to not know would mean like you've just been completely head in the clouds. You've literally imbued nothing. And yet, I met like multiple people like this. You'll also get, I don't think we saw. I can't recall seeing anybody who was raped. Right in the
Mm.
several months I was there, there were a lot of teenage pregnancies. They were just like living with their boyfriends,
Yep.
and the boyfriends were pushing them to do it. Yeah, it was. Some of the workers hated us and and would yell insults at us and curse at us. Uh,
Shocking.
However, you also see like there there are moments of grace in
Mm.
there, is how I would put it. Um, I've mentioned this before. Like there were people there who, like, were incredibly intense, arguably too intense, you might say. But on this issue, it's kind of hard to fault them, and they would be people that'd be like, I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I came in, was immediately criticized for like not running up to the girls. They were going to the door and speaking with them, and I'm like, what? But then I would see these people turn away people from the abortion, have conversations you would not think in a million years would have left. Like stunning stuff.
Yes.
And and like they would say things to me like, why did you? There are people coming. I'm like, because it's like 10 degrees out, and I was getting gloves from my car, and they were like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
This is like a real conversation I had, and it's like I want to like be annoyed or dislike this person, and yet then I see her like, okay, so this girl's not getting an abortion, but she needs help. So you drive her to church on Sundays, you go and get her the stuff from here, you check in with her once a week. Like there was literally a network,
Mm.
and it was like this person leading it. So the Holy Spirit works through these people. Uh, I've seen it, and it's these moments of grace where people are turned away and people are turned aside from committing these murders you would never think in a million years. It was also a weird experience too, because most of the people were there because they're like, oh, these poor suffering women, and I was like, I'm not. And people would ask me like, what's your connection, right? And I'd be like, honestly, I don't have one. They would look at me, go, really? And they go, I don't really care about the women at all, to be honest with you. And then they're like, that's like, then why are you here? It's like, 'cause they're killing babies. It's like that because I don't want them to murder people. They're killing babies. I care about the babies. Um,
Yep.
Now, is this right? I would say probably not. It's probably an overall counterproductive attitude. you need to develop certain empathy for these people, otherwise you're never going to break through, right? Like, and that, again, you see that over and over. You need to be able to empathize. You need to be able to say, like, more. You need to be able to offer more than the logical argument, because once again, so many of these people are just too stupid to get the logical argument. And that's always been the most offensive thing about abortion to me as well, is
Mm-hmm.
that the most offensive thing about abortion to me is not that it's evil, because there's lots of evil things. It's that the
Tons.
arguments in favor of it are so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so obviously stupid. Like, refuted with 2 seconds of thought and a sentence. And it's like, once I realized this, and I did need to kind of have the wool pulled off of my eyes, once I realized this and the scales fell, it was like almost offensive to me that they were making these arguments and acting like they were good arguments. When I'm like, no, what you're saying doesn't make any sense at all. Like, did you not put any thought into what you're saying? And if you pointed that out, they would literally just get mad. Like, how dare you? You're against women's autonomy. It's like, what are you talking about? How does that make any sense? We're just saying, don't kill your child.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah. So this is me convicting all of you who are listening, if you've never done anything like that before, to do it if you really think it's that important, even if it's only for a little bit. Even just like,
Yep.
because there's a point where you got to go, like, somebody mentioned this too. There's a guy named Larry Chapp who's being interviewed on Pints with Aquinas. He started what he called a Catholic workers farm, which is like, he was a professor, uh, uh, a theology professor. He quit in his 50s with his wife and started a farm. And my understanding, I don't know exactly, but my understanding is that the goal of the farm is that, like, he gives away the food that they grow on the farm.
Mm.
Like, that's entirely the point of it. It was like called a Catholic workers farm. And he did this because he was like, basically said, I was teaching Dorothy Day, who was a former communist who converted to Catholicism, but had like this radical love for the poor, and she's now a servant of God. Um, he's like, and basically, you read her enough, and it pricks your conscience because you realize you could be doing something and you're not. And he's absolutely right. And this is the
Mm.
same thing with all of like, there's a point where you're going to be reading all of this stuff about the right thing to do and agreeing with it, but if you're not actually doing it, none of that matters.
Right.
And that's why what Larry Chapp is doing, I think he was entirely correct. You might not say he was correct in the way that he did it if you know enough about it. I don't know. Like, if you have some sort of specific issue with Dorothy Day or whatever. But what I mean is the principle was correct.
Mm.
He was convicted by his conscience, so he moved.
Yep.
He actually did something about it. If you are convicted by your conscience and if you acknowledge the truth of Jesus Christ's teachings, but you don't change, then that's going to be the moment. It's the parable of the 10, that I've heard like 3 different translations. The 10 virgins, the 10 bridesmaids.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, which is the most terrifying parable, in my opinion, uh, in the Bible, although there is competition. But it's, in my opinion, the most terrifying parable in the Bible. He tells 10 bridesmaids he's going to be coming back, so some of the and to wait for him. So some of the bridesmaids go and get oil, and I think like there are 20 bridesmaids. 10 of them go and get oil or something like that.
7, I think.
Yeah, I don't think the exact numbers matter much. Something
Mm.
like that. Yes. Uh, they get oil, and then the other bridesmaids go, well, we're I'm not gonna waste my money on oil. We don't even know back, and they don't bother. And then when the bridesmaids coming, they look, or when the bridegroom comes back, they look at the bridesmaids and they say, hey, can you give us some of your oil? Because, like, we're out. and the smart bridesmaids say, "No, we're not giving you some of my oil. Then out. You're gonna have to go and get it yourself." So they do. They go and get the oil themselves. But by that time, the bridegroom, I mean, has already returned and has already taken the bridesmaids back with him. So they come to his party, his banquet, right? And they knock on the door and beg to be let in because they weren't there. They're getting, and that's when he says, "Depart from me, for I've never known you." Uh, it's a chilling moment, and
Mm,
the point, of course, is eternal vigilance.
yes. It's as I proceed in my faith of in Christ, I tend to experience these things more viscerally, like the idea of being told I never knew you. It's like no, thank you. You know.
Yeah, it's a terrifying, a really really terrifying moment of the gospel, and Jesus makes it clear at multiple occasions that he even says it explicitly. Just saying "Lord, Lord" not going to get you into the kingdom of heaven. Just because you know of Jesus, or even just because you theoretically accept Jesus,
Hmm.
right? Like, intellectually, I have grasped Jesus. He is not going to. He's going. No, that's not enough.
Right.
Not if you can do more, and you're not, and you know that you should. If you know better, you're not getting out of this. Just like with the bridesmaids. If you know better, if you know that the bridegroom is coming, then why are you not prepared? We have no excuse. We know he's coming.
Yep.
Today was the feast of the baptism of the Lord in the Catholic Church. So the baptism of the Lord, of course, is Mary and Joseph, or I think just Mary and Jesus. Mary and Jesus received two prophecies. Uh,
Yeah.
one from Simeon the prophet and one from Anna the prophetess. By the way, is Anna the only female prophet mentioned in the Bible, or is there someone else?
I can't remember her name, but there was a judge,
Deborah.
Deborah. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a judge, and she probably said something prophetic at some point.
I
There
feel
was a
like
lot
she
of
was a
mixing.
prophetess.
Yeah, there was a lot of mixing of these sorts of roles,
Like
but
it's
whatever.
anyway. Yeah, it's
Sorry,
yeah.
I got distracted because this is always something I wondered, like Anna the prophetess, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's like there are very few female prophets, but they do exist. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, Simeon says something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember the exact verse, but something along the lines of like, now your servant can depart in peace, for his promise has been fulfilled. And he tells, I don't remember if he tells Mary or if Anna tells Mary, and you yourself a sword shall pierce, for he is destined for the rise and fall of many in Israel. But the point of me bringing this up is that we live in the time of where we can read Simeon's prophecy. We're in the age of the Lord. Christ has come. So we don't have the excuse. If we don't have, the oil ready when the bridegroom arrives, he's not going to look kindly upon this because we have the gospels. So
Mm.
that's, I guess, part of, and this goes to what we're talking about today as well, I think, in a more concrete way than you think, because everybody always goes like, what's the concrete plan? What do you do? And it's kind of odd when people ask that because the answer of what do you do is actually quite obvious, right? It's it's never really been difficult to figure out what to do. The Bible tells us, do the works of mercy, pray, worship God. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
make if you want to make change in the country, if you don't like the way that the country has been going, then there's a very simple solution. Like, okay, you don't like abortion, so have you been volunteering at sidewalk counseling in front of abortion clinics? Have you been volunteering your time? You don't like the way that the government handles so much charity. That's great. Have you helped any private charities yourself?
Have you,
You know,
have
there
you,
are many.
yeah, have you been a hypocrite in front of other people, or have you stood strong for what you know is true? Like, there's, when it comes to, like, say, the American spirit, especially as it relates to God, there's always been, the preacher man with a, on a mule with a Bible, in his hand, preaching the gospel. Our first formulative memories as a nation is prayer. One of our first true works of art is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and it's a sermon. Um, it's
Yeah, dope as hell.
it's great. Uh, it's one of those things where as Americans, there is no separation between our civic, national, racial, whatever life you want, and God. With some, you can say, well, they were just Germanic barbarians who were pushed by the Huns, from the steppe or whatever, But no, for America, and I'm not going to say that we're the city on set on a hill or anything ridiculous like that, but for America, we have continuously sought God until recently. We had whole movements where, revivals happened across whole areas of our country larger than most of the countries of Europe. Like that sort of thing doesn't come from anywhere but God's direct, interference, quote unquote. His hand has been upon us. We have been blessed, and we're continuously blessed now. But I think that because of some things that have happened, boomer truth, worship of Israel, idols of our lives, more than, is, shall we say, the natural sin-filled conclusion of people in the general sense. You know, I think we've lost God. We have abandoned God nationally. Anthony and me were seeking God. I've been wrestling with the idea of his second coming. Not that I think it wouldn't happen, but one of the things is I became so disgusted with boomers, or boomer spiritually people. Oh, the Lord's going to come back on such and such a date. Oh, don't you know, aren't you ready, for his return on such and such a date? It disgusted me so much because the Bible clearly states that it's according to God's will when he comes back, not some sort of weird calculation from Easter Island. If you've seen the camping at the end of the world, about one Harold Camp who did such a thing. But there were many others. He was just the biggest national movement of it. Where it disgusted me so much that not that I doubted that Christ would come back, but if somebody said, "Oh, he's going to come back," I'm like, "Yeah, not till the boomers are dead." And quite frankly, I think that was blasphemous, and I repent of it. How can I have faith in Christ coming back, and also, say, yeah, but not in your time, old man. Like that wasn't faithful of me. Like it was driven by a real feeling, by another feeling of unholiness of these people who thought that they could, get one up on God, by having the date and time of his return, when in actuality, God says no one knows the day or the hour except for God the Father himself. There's a time and place for it, but it's not yet. It might be tomorrow. And I had such anger over the boomers for the many, many, many problems that I've talked about on this channel. Uh, Many problems from the boomers for, their unfaithfulness, their selfishness towards God. Oh, we're being blessed for this and we deserve to be blessed. We should be blessed. You know, God will come back in our time. All these other things that drove me up a wall as a child and a young adult, that now, that my pastor's going through Revelation in his sermons. That I realized that was, quite frankly, not, I don't want to, I don't know if I'd go as far to say as like, a deep sin, but it wasn't what God, how God sees the world. I was out of sync with God's true opinion for it. And maybe it was sin because I was wrathful for my elders, who were boomers, but I couldn't stand to hear, "Oh, God will come back in my time." For people who otherwise lived unfaithfully, who had no charity for their own countrymen, uh, who had, no sign of faith except they came to service every week. They let their children fall away from the faith, and then when I don't know what happened, like what am I, a young man at this point, supposed to do? Supposed to think about these things? How can I, work with my elders, and still see them go on things that are not just wrong, right? Like eventually, Anthony and I will do the Eucharist versus communion, Mass versus communion stream. You know, that is something we can argue over. There are things there that can be argued over. Not that I am for the mass. I'm just saying that there's arguments to be made. Uh,
Well, I'm
hold on,
going
hold on, hold
to
on, hold on. Let me finish
go
my
ahead.
point. But for the matter of the second coming, there is no question, there is not a shadow of doubt that, and this is still tied into the American experience because I think boomers are the sin-filled generation that's keeping us from God. Uh, the idea that you can call down God for the second coming, ex- that you can say, I can know what's in God's mind. To such an extent, I know what he keeps secret from Jesus Christ, his own son. Like, this is ridiculous nonsense. Quote unquote keeps it secret, but this it fills me with frothing rage. Go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say that, discussing Chesterton again, who is, because of our upcoming interview with Alquist, is on the brain. Uh, Chesterton would say that these sorts of conversations that we have are, in fact, the only conversations, in a sense, worth having.
Hmm.
That there is that the even though we don't agree about them, at the very least, we are correct in acknowledging their importance. It
Yep.
is sort of like what Dr. Peter Kraft says about the Eucharist himself in his book Jesus Shock. He says that the Eucharist, that if you don't grasp how important the Eucharist is, then that is a sign that you simply don't understand it. Not, and he goes either, and he goes, and he's not making an argument like how important, as in, it's correct. Anybody who understands it would agree with it. That's not what he's saying. Uh, Kraft isn't so crass to say something like that. Uh, he's making rather the point that you either have to think you think one of three things. Either the Eucharist is God, in which case it is the center of everything. This is the position of the Catholic Church as well as the other apostolic branches of Christianity. So Orthodox, the Eastern churches, Anglican as well, has a real presence. I believe even Calvinists have
Some.
some Calvinists had some form of real presence for a while. Uh, in which case, it needs to be the center of what you do because it's God, right? God is obviously the center of the religion. Or you think that we're worshiping, falsely worshiping bread, in which case it is a vile blasphemy. Uh,
Yep.
utterly deranged and evil. That's Kraft's point. His point is like he's not making the point that well, if you just knew what it was, agree. No, his point is if you knew what it was, you would understand that you can't just. The third option is you go, oh well, I don't really think it matters. No, like you might not think it matters. Then what we should conclude about a person who says that is they don't understand the issue properly. They have not grasped the things that are at stake. That's Chesterton's point in orthodoxy, fundamentally, that the idea that we are, the idea that in the past we used to burn heretics at the stake was far more sane than today. Now, he says, to be clear, I'm not saying that was necessarily the right thing to do. I am saying that the impulse is fundamentally correct. The heretic presents a danger, is the only thing, in fact, as he would point out, that represents a danger to society. So
Yep.
when we have these discussions on like the purpose of the mass and whatever, we happen to live in a society where, as again Kraft would put it, the maniac is at the door. So feuding brothers reconcile, right?
Yep.
But let's extend the metaphor here and point something out. We're in a society where a maniac is at the door. It is not a healthy society.
Yep.
Truthfully, like, and Ben agrees with this, which is why I say it. Like, Ben is a very, very good friend of mine. Ben's going to be in my wedding. Like, we're that close friends.
When were you going to
In
tell
a
me about this wedding?
Yeah, you'll learn eventually.
Sorry, keep
Yeah.
going. Keep going.
Yeah, so we're very close friends.
Yes.
We generally get along fairly well, but in a healthy society, we probably shouldn't be friends.
Yep.
Like, there are fundamental like, the fact that we're capable of being friends is because there is a larger threat that we can both agree on and unite against. However, the fact that there is a larger threat is not good for society. It's
Right.
bad. It's actually quite bad for society. Uh, Ideally, we would be in a world where the questions that we differ on are looked at as the fundamental and most important questions. We don't
Right.
live in that world. That's not the world that we're in. We live in a sick world. Chesterton, of course, foresaw all of this. Uh, as I mentioned this to you, Ben, and we're nearing the end of the tangent, and also to draw some hype for the Alquist stream, but I view Chesterton with something close to awe and reverence.
Mm.
There are very, very, very people whose opinions and thoughts I respect as much as Chesterton, to the point where if there is something that I disagree with him about, as I mentioned earlier, I tend to try and think seriously about why, and also consider if I might just be wrong. Now, I didn't end up changing my opinion, but I do understand what Chesterton was saying, and I do think that he got it from, like, real observations of America at the time. I don't think that, this is in reference to his America is fundamentally like a church state.
Mm.
And I don't agree with that. However, I don't think he made it up. I think he got it from. I think his visit to America gave him that impression because it's fundamentally how America was redefining itself at the time that he visited.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was correct to note this. But genuinely, with Chesterton, like, the man was a prophet in so many ways, foresaw so many things, much like his good friend Hilaire Belloc, who is respected in the modern day even less than Chesterton, but was arguably just as brilliant. When I mentioned Chesterton, my favorite author for many years, still my favorite author, I would say, overall, at least to personal taste, is C.S. Lewis. The Great Divorce I consider to be like a genuinely life-changing book. It completely changed the way that I viewed heaven and hell, like why people go to hell, and my view of how that made sense.
Yes.
Chesterton's better. Just straight up, he is a bet. He might not be. You could argue fiction writer. He only has a few fictional works, less than you'd think. Although he did write. He is a pioneer of detective fiction, with his Father Brown mysteries. But even then, like, The Man Who Was Thursday is a classic and a great book. Is it better than Lewis's best work? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm.
As an essayist, Chesterton is superior.
Yes.
And this is no. Anybody who has read C.S. Lewis knows what a high compliment I am paying in saying that.
Mm.
Because Lewis is probably our last great essayist, unless you want to count Tom Simon, which I'm willing to do, but he hasn't quite hit it mainstream. So, yeah, Lewis was mainstream.
I
Uh,
think, yeah, we have opinions about Tom Simon. Uh, yeah, keep going.
he's a brilliant. I will. Yeah, I'm going to say what I've always said, which is that I think he is a genuinely, unbelievably good essayist. But Chesterton was simply another level. He almost like when I'm reading Orthodoxy, I almost can't read, which is his most famous nonfiction book. I almost can't read Orthodoxy for too long because almost every page he says something that is obviously correct that I have that if I'm being honest with myself, I have never considered before once in my life. But now that he said it, I will like repeat to everyone as if it's just clearly true, and you should all just know it. Like he has a long section about how as a matter of fact, when somebody goes mad, it's not because they embrace contradiction, but because they can't. And
Mm.
you hear this. This is a good example, actually. You hear this and you go, "That can't possibly be correct, right?" And then Chesterton explains it, and it's not only clear that what he said is exactly correct, it's clear that like, yeah, now I guess I just completely agree with him. Right? He goes on, he goes, okay, so imagine this is an example that he gave. Imagine that you have a man who claims to be Jesus Christ. He said, and why does he claim to be Jesus Christ? Well, it's because this explains every little detail about the world. Things that he didn't previously understand, he now has a perfect explanation for. So you try and argue with this man to convince him he is not Jesus Christ. And he goes, I suggest you try and do this with any member of, Bedlam. He used a different insane asylum, but that's the American version. Yeah. Uh, right, with any member of Bedlam, discuss with them, somebody with that sort of delusion, or that they're in like the Truman Show, they're constantly being watched because they're the televised star of reality. Try and talk them out of it. See how you do. And he goes, odds are you're probably going to do very poorly because generally these people are actually quite rigorously logical. They have thought through everything. They know exactly, they can explain all of it in ways that you didn't even consider, probably better than you could. They actually probably have a more comprehensive explanation of reality than you. So, what would you do to talk him out of it? You would probably say something along the lines of, all right, if you are Jesus Christ, isn't that just sad? Isn't that petty? Like, it's such a petty God. You can't control the weather. You can't claim to be king. You can't do anything, right? It's such a miserable life. Like, wouldn't it be so much better for you if you just accepted that, you're a person, that there are greater things in the world? And he goes, now, I want you to notice this. It's not a logical argument that you're making. You're not arguing him out of it. What you are instead doing is pointing to the smallness of his reality. And this is what Chesterton means when he says that the madman is somebody who has in fact fixed on a point of logic. And that's when he goes, as a matter of fact, poets just generally don't go mad. And the exceptions are the poets who also happen to be logicians, like Poe. So I thought that was like an that's a great example of something that I would never ever have considered before. That now that he says it is like very clearly true. And he claims that this is the point of orthodoxy. The point of orthodoxy is not to make an argument that Christianity is true. The point of orthodoxy is to show people that the orthodox view of the world is the more romantic and admirable view. It is the view that you should want to be true, which is something that John C. Wright has talked about as well. But that's the entire point of orthodoxy, right? And he goes, it is a view that has has certain moments of tension and difficult things to explain, right? And parts of reality that are, beyond us that we can't fathom. But for all of that, that makes it more likely to be true, not less, because that's just what reality's like. We shouldn't expect reality to be entirely incomprehensible to us limited to our limited human intellects. All right, get hyped for the Chesterton stream. I am looking forward to it. Anything you wanted
Yes.
to say, Ben?
I was looking for the date for the emails. Um,
16th.
16th. Cool, cool. So next week is going to be kind of a test stream. I've got some new things that I'm going to be doing, including going on unauthorized. Hopefully, technology willing. Um, the key. I'm going to go over comments real quick, then I'll close us out. Uh, So Merg Magler Mac just says people forget that most of modern Israel's leaders, Netanyahu included, were all flavors of atheist. Yeah, no. Many Israelis are basically atheist. Very few, Bradford Walker says very few governments recognize citizenship and nationality are not the same thing. Uruguay is one of them. Uruguay keep winning. You've been winning for a long time. The former is a legal status WRT state. The latter is literally of the blood, capitalized. It is a diabolical psyop to conflate the two, and we are now seeing just how little assimilation there's been in the U.S. It's very true. It's very true. And that's the thing. Like, like Anthony said, the madman is at the door. We have lost the frontier spirit. We have lost a certain connection to God that our race had. That even though Anthony is not necessarily the same as a heritage American, that he can feel as an American, that he wouldn't feel in Europe necessarily. Because of how culture and ideas are completely different there. I know when I speak to my English relatives, it is hard for them to understand my yearnings, my spirit, the things that I want to do for its own sake. Even for myself, I find that European part of me, making me a sort of American half breed. The spirit is there, but the gumption, the wherewithal, it just isn't the same as I've seen in other men with the same words as mine. There's something more, something truer than the experiences that people call forward as American. Frankly, if you don't want to go to space, if you don't desire that frontier, you are not an American. Whatever people say about genetics or who is intended to be where, if you don't look up with yearning, if you don't look back with awe, you are not an American. Everything else is what's a good everything else is a madman focusing on a piece of logic and refusing to bring in the contradiction of the American spirit that man can worship God at one hand and still grasp for the stars with the other. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy it and look forward to that stream with David Alquist very soon. Thank you, and good night.
Dale Alquist.
What did I say?
David.
Yeah, anyway, sorry. David Halquist is our friend. Alquist is the gentleman we're bringing on. Excuse me, excuse me. All right, have a good one, guys.